Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hi, guys. I freaking hate my hair. Hat time. Whatever. Um, why didn't the USA invade North Vietnam? Good question. By the way, I heard the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a major factor in doing more military force in Vietnam, was fake. USA, not the good guy always, ever. No, always. Let's find out. How y'all doing? Good, great, love y'all. My name's Connor. Hope you're doing well. Are you? Good, great. Can't hear you, but I hope you're doing well. Let's find out. Love History Matters. I feel like I don't have to say I love History Matters. I've reacted to over 100 History Matters videos. I've been reacting to History Matters videos since I started the channel. I love this channel. They're short, which a lot of history buffs don't like because they're oversimplified. But for me, I have ADD. I like getting a brief overview of a conflict before I dive into individual parts of it, more specific. Let's go.
Many of you will know the Vietnam War was mostly fought in one Vietnam, South Vietnam, which had to deal with incursions from its northern neighbor as well as Cambodia and Laos. Throughout the war, the Saigon government was primarily...
Guys, can I restart?
As many of you will know, the Vietnam War was mostly fought in one Vietnam, South Vietnam, which had to deal with incursions from its northern neighbor as well as Cambodia and Laos. Throughout the war, the Saigon government was primarily aided by the United States, which kept the overwhelming majority of its military efforts in the south. But given that North Vietnam was their primary enemy, why didn't the United States fight there? Why didn't the USA invade North Vietnam? So
really good question, honestly.
First of all, a bit of background. Vietnam used to be part of French Indochina, which along with many other colonies gained its independence from France in the wake of World War II. As a condition for its freedom, Vietnam won independence as both North Vietnam, centered in Hanoi, and South Vietnam, run from Saigon.
Laos,
Shockingly,
Cambodia.
the Vietnamese people weren't happy with being divided, and it wasn't long until both Vietnams were fighting to unify under their respective governments. North Vietnam was communist, and this was the Cold War. And so naturally, both Moscow and Washington took
who are the ghosts? That's Marx, obviously. Is that Lenin? Trotsky? Engels?
Vietnam was communist, and this was the Cold War. And so naturally, both Moscow and Washington took an interest. The United States believed that the South was going to lose eventually, and so sought to intervene to prevent the spread of communism. But given that invading the North would have relieved the South, and also, if successful, would mean that there would be one less communist nation in the world, why didn't the US invade there? Well, even though the US didn't send troops into North Vietnam, they did bomb it. A lot. However, in spite of the United States' freedom to use its air force over North Vietnam, it never launched an invasion of the country for several important reasons. The first and primary reason was China. The US military and government remembered that in the...
Can I just say this? I feel like in Vietnam, the US might have been the bad guy. I feel like we might have been the bad guy.
Prevent this mean that there would be one less communist nation in the world, why didn't the US invade there? Well, even though the US didn't send troops into North Vietnam, they did bomb it. A lot. However, in spite of the United States' freedom to use its air force over North Vietnam, it never launched an invasion of the country for several important reasons. The first and primary reason was China. The US military and government remembered that in the Korean War, when US forces pushed north into the communist state and towards the Chinese border, Beijing soon got involved. And the Chinese government was quick to remind the United States that if it were to move against Hanoi, China would send troops to directly intervene. And this threat now had much more weight since China had just fallen out with the USSR.
I know that when Stalin died and Khrushchev? Brezhnev? Gorbachev? Not Gorbachev. Was it Khrushchev?
And thus...
Oh, great. Come on. Khrushchev. Okay, so Khrushchev was the guy. And I believe that Mao was such a huge like Stalin fanboy, like enormous. I think he loved Stalin. And when he died, Khrushchev is kind of like, hey, that guy was kind of nuts. Maybe we shouldn't go full-throated communist playbook. And then Mao didn't like that Khrushchev was lessening the direct communism. And let me know if I'm wrong, guys. I'm no expert. And so Mao didn't like Khrushchev so much. But I wonder why the Americans would be afraid of a Chinese invasion of Korea from the north, since China had just been struggling from an intense civil war towards the end of, and in the middle and towards the end of World War II. And so you'd think their military wouldn't be that strong. And so that'd be even more reason for the U.S. to just push in. But apparently I'm wrong.
Intervene. And this threat now had much more weight since China had just fallen out with the USSR, and thus it was believed in Washington that China was serious, since if it failed to follow through, it would no longer be seen as a serious in Washington that China was
things Mao means business shakes in Estonia.
Serious, since if it failed to follow through, it would no longer be seen as a serious communist state. As such, it made the most sense for the United States to adopt the strategy of defeating the Northern Vietnamese forces within the borders of the South. The second reason...
Guys, I'm sorry, not sorry.
The USSR, and thus it was believed in Washington that China was serious, since if it failed to follow through, it would no longer be seen as a serious communist state. As such, it made the most sense for the United States to adopt the strategy of defeating the Northern Vietnamese forces within the borders of the South. The second reason was domino theory. This was the idea that should a state fall to communism, it would influence its neighbours to do the same thereafter. Thus, the American strategy was only to prevent the further spread of communism, not to use military force to topple already established Marxist states. The fear being that if already existing communist countries felt that their mere existence was grounds for an invasion, many may have asked for Soviet or Chinese nuclear protection.
Guys, so in essence, did the Americans want to do to Vietnam what they were successful in doing in Korea, in that creating a zone where, you know, one's north, one's south, and they were hoping that, hey, we can do the same thing like we did with Korea, a South and a North Vietnam.
Was to topple already established Marxist states. The fear being that if already existing communist countries felt that their mere existence was grounds for an invasion, many may have asked for Soviet or Chinese nuclear protection, which, as previously established, had the potential to cause problems. And also, the American government was much less optimistic when it came to the outcome of the war. Whilst many believed that North Vietnam could be defeated, there were few that believed that communism in the North could be eradicated. This was primarily because many in both Vietnams associated the end of French imperial rule there with the communist resistance. That said, there were those in the military that believed risking war with China was worth it. This didn't happen because Congress wouldn't have approved the resources and manpower necessary to do it, and also because at this point the president was busy with a thing. For some, though, it seemed like the only way out. America was kind of trapped at this point. It couldn't advance, leaving all of the momentum with the North Vietnamese forces, but it also couldn't withdraw, because doing so would be admitting defeat to a communist state and would also leave an ally to be conquered. And so, after a decade of this, the United States had to accept that the cost of helping South Vietnam was too high. And so, in 1973, after the US had signed an agreement with the North stating that it totally wouldn't annex the South, in 1973, after the
agreement, we'll all stop shooting, the US will leave, North Vietnam won't invade the South.
Signed an agreement with the North, stating that it totally wouldn't annex the South, the United States left. And something which would surprise exactly 0 people, the North invaded once more in 1975. And soon the two Vietnams were reunited under a communist government.
Hey, you guys ready to face the Afghans, the Taliban? We're gonna leave America.
Or in 1975, and soon the two Vietnams were reunited under a communist government. I hope you enjoyed this episode with a special thanks.
And thank you for making. He used to say thank you for watching. Love his channel. So I know that with the Vietnam War, there was a lot of back and forth. Like the South invaded the North invaded the South, maybe a few times, and then they ultimately settled here. Whereas the approach in Vietnam was just, that's North, this is South, keep the boundary. And I wonder if maybe, not to say it would have been right for America to do it, invading the North despite risking Chinese intervention, maybe would have led to a more American-friendly outcome. But in the end, I think the Americans probably should have lost. I know there was a lot of paranoia around communism USA, but there's nothing that pisses me off more about the USSR and the USA than both of them claiming that they want just everyone to, peacefully accept their way of government, communism, capitalism. And in the end, if anyone refuses, the USSR quashes, or the USA quashes. And so that's the big thing with the Cold War. I'm realizing is two giant powers above everyone else by a long shot, wanting their political, economic, social system to win out, and they begin, hypocrisy after hypocrisy. So I'm no expert. I'm still trying to learn. All right, guys, just like you. Or if you're not, then you can teach me down in the comments. Would love to see it. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.